I view the business through three lenses: my customers, my employees, and then my investors. And like that's a context that I bring to every decision I make. First 5 million would have been me, my co-founder, and then we had an early sales employee, Andy Brewer, who's still with us, who's VP of sales here at ZoomInfo today.
Really?
Who is doing the sales with us, yeah. I do these like round tables with SDRs, AEs, AMs, engineers, product people. And I basically just tell them, like, tell me what sucks. The culture is whatever you want it to be now.
You're
You're the new CEO of this company. You get to decide what to do. You get to decide the culture.
Hello, Henry, and welcome. I obviously am very familiar with you and your career, but for the benefit of our listeners, please give yourself a quick introduction and then we'll dive in.
Sure, great. Thank you for having me, Laura. My name is Henry Schuck. I'm the founder and CEO of ZoomInfo. I am in my 19th year as CEO of ZoomInfo and founded the business when I was 23 years old in my law school dorm and bootstrapped it for the first 30 million in revenue, took outside funding from 2 different private equity firms, IPO'd the business. Today we're just over 1.2 billion in revenue, continue to grow, and we work with hopefully most of the sales teams that are listening to this podcast. And if not most of the sales teams, we'd love to be working with most of your sales teams.
Honestly, that story just alone is just crazy. But I, for one, am very excited for this conversation because I've followed, watched, been a consumer for my shorter career, which is 7 years. But what I really want to do is just like go through the whole experience because I just think this is crazy. So going all the way back to 23 years old, where did like the initial idea come from? And also like, I'm just thinking like there must have been like no tech, no nothing. Like what is that, like 2007, 2006?
2007. Yep, 2007. So the story is when I was in college.
Yeah.
I went to college. My mom gave me $5,000, which was the remnants of a life insurance policy. And she said, "This is your college fund. Good luck." That survived me for 1 year in college. And when at the end of the first year, I sold my PlayStation and I moved in with some friends. I had enough for the first month of rent. And then I found a job on the job board at the university that was to be effectively like an assistant at a very small software company in Las Vegas. And that company was the precursor to ZoomInfo. We grew it over the next 5 years from about 300,000 in revenue when I got there to about 5 million in revenue when I left 5 years later. The 5 million in revenue, the profitability metrics were basically the same. It was 5 million in revenue and $4.7 million in profitability. And so there wasn't much of a business around it, but clearly a big demand. I didn't think I could build a career there. So I left and I went to law school. And then my first year of law school, I put $25,000 on my credit card. My co-founder put $25,000 on his credit card, and we started what would eventually become ZoomInfo. When we founded the business, it was called Discover.org, and it was called Discover.org between 2007 and 2019. We made an acquisition of a company called ZoomInfo, and it was a much better name than Discover.org and had some more brand equity, so we changed the name in 2019 to ZoomInfo.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I didn't know any of this, so this is really interesting. And then, so you're ZoomInfo now, and then how was your like 0 to 1 million run? Like how many people were involved? What did it look like back then? Like what was your kind of like go-to-market strategy in that sense to just kind of get it out there from that 0 to 1? I'm super intrigued.
Yeah, 0 to 1. Look, we were building, I think one of the key reasons why the business was able to be successful in the early days is that we were a pretty niche provider of data. What we were selling it took us 2 years to get to 1 million in revenue. What we were selling in the first 2 years was just data on the IT decision makers of mid-market companies. And so what we were doing was sort of collecting data in an incredibly manual process. Like you said, not a lot of tech in 2007. And so we were out calling into companies that were mid-market companies, doing some internet research. This is like, LinkedIn and data providers, there were none. And so like knowing who worked in an IT department at any company was a mystery. And the way companies went to market back then was they would hire account executives who would go to networking events and bring their Rolodexes, and they'd sell to the same people over and over and over again. And no one really knew who the IT decision makers were at companies. And meanwhile, tech is exploding and people are selling software and hardware and network security, but there was no systematized way to go to market. And so we were gathering that data. We'd spend kind of, 80% of our day building the product, which was at the time essentially gathering data and putting it into a database that was searchable for our clients. And then kind of 20% of our day building an ideal customer list. Because we were collecting data on IT decision makers, but we sold to sales decision makers, sales and marketing. And so we were building a really solid list of sales decision makers at companies, and a solid list of companies that we would go target. And once we got our product, kind of after the first 6 months, got our product to a place where we thought it would be actually sellable into the marketplace. Nice. We took that product, we had this very specific list. We had examples of our product that we would go out and share. And we started doing effectively like really personalized, or as personalized as you could get in 2007, email marketing that generated top of the funnel demand that then we would take to a demo and try to close the business. That was basically how it worked for the first probably 30 million in revenue, honestly. It was continue to build a product, make the product better, expand it up and down from mid-market into Fortune-ranked businesses, and then continue to build out the ideal customer profile list and go market to those folks, set appointments, have an account executive take that appointment to close. The first million was just me. Like it was just me and my co-founder selling. And actually the first 5 million would have been me, my co-founder, and then we had an early sales employee, Andy Brewer, who's still with us, who's a VP of sales here at ZoomInfo today, who was doing the sales with us. Yeah.
Oh, I love that he's still there. That's actually crazy. Yeah. So when you were on that, okay, so let's call it the 0 to 30 million run, when did you feel like, oh, this is something? Like, when did you actually have because everyone just craves product market fit. Everyone goes between like net new business and then actually like focusing on the customer and upselling. Like it's always like flip-flopping with the market and the industry. But when did you feel like, I don't know if you had a conversation with your co-founder or whatever, but like you were like, actually, no, this could be something serious. Like at what point was that?
It was probably when we took our first outside investment, which would have been kind of right around $30 million. I never felt like we didn't have product market fit.
Okay.
I always felt like we had strong product market fit and I'd be able to generate demand for the business. But I probably, until we hit 30 million in revenue and took our first outside equity investment, was probably the first time I felt like, this thing has durability. And I think before that, it kind of felt like, tomorrow this thing could be gone. Like, just I could wake up tomorrow and everything that we've built is just like could disappear for any number of reasons. But I think at that point we felt like, okay, there's something durable that we've built here. Yeah. There were pieces along the way. We sold Google really early in the
logo of Google early.
Logo of Google gave us a lot of confidence, and we beat our closest competitor to win that deal. I was so nervous that day, and Andy was running that sale, and I was like, we were in the final bake-off. It was us against our competitor. They're doing 2 demos side by side, and I remember like during the demo, I was like, I have to leave the building. I can't be here while you do this because I'll be on pins and needles. So I just left, and I came back an hour later. It was like, how did it go? And he was like, it went great. And so when we closed that logo, I think that was the first time that was like the first indication of like, hey, this is something pretty real, but not until 30 million in outside funding did I feel like it was durable.
Yeah, and there's a real difference, right? And even with the market right now, it's crazy. So I have so many questions I could ask, by the way, because this is just my favorite topic. But in terms of actually scaling aggressively, right? So you've done 30 million and gone all the way up, but how did you, Oh, actually, let me ask this, because this I want to start with this. How did you then start to remove yourself from the like day to day and then that stepping out? Because like we call it like the founder syndrome, right? But like it's almost impossible if it's like you built the product almost like you were there from day one. Like I would just love to kind of understand from like your brain, how at each step are you like removing yourself to more strategic, more visionary from like being involved to the point that you were in the room with Google at one point selling deals?
Yeah, so first of all, I think this was like the hiring of sales reps was dependent on like my ability to generate demand that would fill a sales rep's calendar. So like the way that it worked was we would generate a bunch of demand and appointments. Those would go to sellers. And if I thought I could generate more demand, then I needed more sellers to do it. The first two sellers that we had at ZoomInfo, I mean, actually, honestly, the first 5 sellers that we had at ZoomInfo, they would come in, they would shadow me for the like how I was selling deals. They'd be on like a number of calls for like 2 weeks. And then they would go, and then I would start sending them leads that were coming into the top of the funnel. I would shadow them. And like in the early days, you couldn't send an email out to a prospect without me seeing it. I had access to everybody's inboxes. And so then I would be like, show me the email you're going to send. I would edit it with them. I would see like, hey, this guy emailed. Why have you not emailed him back? It's been like 15 minutes. Like, when are you going to email this person? And so like we set a standard for how we would respond to folks, what we would say in those responses. There was a lot of like shadowing of our new sales reps, and then really like getting everybody to say like the same things, run the exact same motion, run a very similar process. And then that first like group of 5 and then 10 sales folks were like pretty intensely trained on a methodology that we had. And they weren't really allowed in their first like time to deviate from it.
Yeah, okay.
It was like, this is how you're gonna generate demand. This is how you're gonna do a demo. Here's every question that you're going to get asked. Here's how you're going to answer those questions. Here's how you're going to ask for a follow-up after. And then everybody like lived and died by that process. The first job I ever had, the second job I ever had, was I did door-to-door sales for a newspaper, like a newspaper subscription. And I would go knock on doors and I'd ask them if they would buy a subscription to the Glendale News Press. And the thing that I remember though is as I was getting that job, the guy who ran the little team of like 12 to 15-year-olds who did this job dropped off a packet of information at my house, which like explained the job, but then had a list of objections and answers to those objections. And part of the rule was, do not leave the door of somebody's house until you've gotten 6 no's. And here's every objection they can give you. I've got to talk to my husband or wife. And what do you answer? I already have another newspaper subscription. What do you answer? It's too expensive. What do you answer? I don't have any need for a newspaper subscription. What do you answer? And then so we knew like you were to memorize the answers to every one of those objections. And if you're standing in front of somebody's doorstep and they give you these objections and you stay there for 6 no's, you're almost guaranteed to get the sale. And so like I had to memorize all of those objections. And like at ZoomInfo, that wasn't very different. I had actually built a sales playbook that had all the objections that you would get, the flow of the demo, what you're going to show, how you're going to show it, anything that they're going to say, and then what the follow-up should be after, and then how to manage it. But like every objection that you could receive from a customer, we had already cataloged, and then our sales reps were required to memorize and then bring to bear in market.
It's so funny. There's 2 things there. One's the door-to-door sales things, because people ask like to me like, what would you put as like the most pivotal thing to like your successful career? I genuinely always say it was just being like a cold outbound SDR. Like if you can do that type of role for at least a year and absolutely nail it, A, for the ability to accept the no's as part of the process, but B, just to have that resilience for when you move into your account executive role that you are like you self-gen. I've always just self-gen right my entire career. Yep. It's actually crazy how the people that are at that top level of success, when you said door-to-door sales, I was like, oh, classic, because that's genuinely like what I believe. And then on top of that, I've done my whole career of coaching people of like those objections. If you put it in part of the process rather than just like off the cusp handling them on a call, and you know exactly when they're coming, what they're coming, or you even pre-handle them in the discovery.
Yep.
And you treat objections like it's like a stakeholder enablement or anything like that, or your org mapping or whatever you're doing, and it's actually just within the process. I think that's just like game changes the whole sales cycle, because then they're prepped. So I just like, that must have built so much like, just like everyone's on the same page, executing at the same level. And then I presume you slowly then came and then hired people to just repeat and repeat and repeat.
Yeah, that was basically the idea. And look, like, I think I'm a lawyer, and in law school, they do teach you like persuasive speaking and how to have a persuasive argument.
I'm sure.
And you're taught like, hey, when you have a persuasive argument, you should in your mind or write down what the other side's argument is going to be, so you really understand it. And oftentimes you might end up believing the other side's argument more than you do, more than you believe your side's argument, but you have to know it. And you have to know what your responses to those things are going to be. And so a lot of what we do when you get an objection, that is like probably the first-ish time in the sales process where your sales skills, your sales professionalism actually is on display. 100%. Like, can you persuade somebody who has some concern about your product or service that concern is either like unfounded, or there's a workaround around it, or you've heard that concern before, but here are customers who've navigated through that and have had an incredible amount of success. Like, your ability to be persuasive is absolutely on display when somebody's making an objection. Like,
100%.
That's your opportunity to give them a different narrative. Like, I come and I say, like, well, if I have access to this and my competitor has access to this, then what real advantage do I have? And then you have a real opportunity to say, like, do you think you can out-execute your competitor with access to this? Because that just assumes your competitor is going to run the same motion that you 100%. Are. They're going to call the same people that you are. And that's not reality, first of all. 100%. And then second of all, imagine the disadvantage you're at if that's true. Your competitor has access to all of this information and you don't. Like, how do you square that? Yeah. And you have to put those, I think of it a lot like you have to put a pebble in somebody's shoe, and they've got to go walk on it a little bit until they're just like, dang it, I got to get this pebble out of my shoe. And your job in that process is to put as big of pebbles or as many pebbles as you can into somebody's shoe by persuading them that ZoomInfo's data and insights and intent and workflow is going to drive a better go-to-market motion than what they're running today. And if you've done a good enough job of putting those pebbles in their shoe, at some point they're going to have to take their shoe off and get those pebbles out.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because like they wouldn't be actually giving you these objections if they were just uninterested, right? So like all of these are like buying signals, but it's like changing your mindset into like believing that yes, they're giving you something that you perceive as negative, but actually if you can switch that as okay, they're giving you that because they want to, you're going down the deal cycle is just crazy, because that's when it changed.
Well, I think there's two things happening when they give you an objection. One is like maybe in some places they actually don't believe that this is going to be good for their business. And then again, it's your job as a salesperson. You went into this profession for a reason. That's like lights, camera, action. That's your opportunity.
Let's
go. And then second, they might just be sharing an objection that they believe they're going to get from their boss when they go back and share this internally. And they want to be armed with the answer to share with their boss. And so it's like one of those two things each time.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so interesting, the objection. I love it. Like, I just feel like I'm on like the dance floor. I feel like it's game time. I'm just like, Let's go. I honestly love it. So just switching up in terms of like the whole culture element, because I find this like super interesting, right? Because I feel like you can have two products, and I hate the word culture because it's like, I think it's like overused and it doesn't land as well. But like, honestly, I think it's like the ultimate competitive advantage. If you can get people that believe that your business is the vehicle for them to their next part in their career, they're going to be able to get to where they want to get to, and you're all kind of on the same boat. But like, how have you maintained? Because like, obviously from when it was just you, your co-founder, and was it Brian, the VP of sales, but just like a few of you. And then like, as you're going through all these stages, like what are the key things that you've like noticed, done, like managed to maintain a level of culture that can retain like top talent?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. First, we have a set of cultural principles. I actually rewrote them 3 years ago because, first of all, I assume that when most people hear the words cultural principles who listen to this podcast, they probably like roll their eyes behind their head and just go like, it's just some stupid HR, gobbledygook.
Literally.
And, that's how I felt too. Like, actually, I felt differently. When I first wrote our principles, I called it a manifesto. Wrote it, I sent it to our team. This is who we are. 2015, I remember like being in an airport and getting so annoyed with like feedback from our team about really like things that I believe to be central to who we are. We experiment fast, we make mistakes, we make changes, and then like the sales team would be like, oh, we just did a thing last week and it didn't work and now you're making us do a new thing. And I was like, listen, one of our principles are we're going to try new things, we're going to experiment, we're going to fail, and then we're going to do new things. And so like, don't complain to me about new things. That is how we win. And like, that was one of our principles. I wrote this thing. And then between 2015 and 2022, every new HR person who came into the door got their hands on this manifesto and they shaved like every edge off of it. And so instead of it being like culturally who we were, which I think is very important, when people come into the door, they need to know what this institution stands for. Like, who am I? What are the standards? Like, am I meeting those standards? Am I representing the culture of our business? And if they don't know what that is, they just like float around and there's no like honor in the work that you're doing. And so I rewrote them in 2022. I like sat down, I was like, these things suck. I can't believe we let HR like ruin these. And I'm going to write 5 key cultural principles. I'm going to make sure everybody understands them. Everybody knows them. And then I'm going to give them examples of what it looks and sounds like in the business so they're never confused about them. And today they're be relentless, be an expert, be entrepreneurs, be innovators, be a team. And if you don't know those, and then we give you examples of what they look like and what they sound like, and those are the things that like when I'm not there, your manager's not there, they're a whisper in your ear that tells you like, if I'm not being an entrepreneur, if I'm not being relentless in this deal, if I'm not being an expert in my product and the service that we offer, then I am not who ZoomInfo is. ZoomInfo wins and has won because we've been true to those principles for 19 years. And we're going to continue to win because we've been true to those principles. And are you upholding them or not? Because if you're not upholding them, you're letting everybody around you down. And you should feel bad about that.
It's insane, isn't it? That like taking off every edge is just like, because it is true. Like you need them as like an underlying core principle because then you can execute when people are not there and everything's redundant.
I'm going to give you, every time you miss the mark, I'm going to point to a cultural principle that you missed the mark on. This is not relentless. This is not innovative. This is not you being an expert. And we can all agree that I told you on day one, this is who you're supposed to be. And whatever this feedback I'm giving you doesn't align to that principle. And it makes everything, actually, those conversations much easier.
So you feel like, just to confirm, that you've managed to retain top talent and the culture purely because of like the principles and being able to show them, articulate it, illustrate it, so that when something doesn't go wrong, you can then point to them and be like, where was this? It was absent X, Y, Z.
I think that's one. I think the second one is there's no leaders here. That's another, it should actually be in our principle. It should be a 6th one, but there's no leaders. We don't hire people whose main competency is leading other people. Like, that's an important competency, but you need to know how to do the job of the people on your team. No leaders. And so everybody, all the way up the chain, from the chief technology officer down to a software engineer, from the chief revenue officer down to an SDR, they have done those jobs. They know how to do those jobs. They can go deep into a domain and they can come all the way out and think about strategy for the organization. But we do not have people here who just pontificate or theorize about what their function should do. There are people who have been practitioners in those functions and understand them deeply.
That's unbelievable, because I also think, like, even when you're like going through the sales side, because that's been my career and working like all the way up to like the CRO side, I actually feel like if you haven't been in those roles, it's like impossible to even relate. Like, it's
Yep.
actually impossible. It's like there's nothing more annoying as an SDR when you're being managed by like a top performing AE who's never been an SDR that just got promoted to like head of sales. That
Yeah.
has got to be one of the most annoying things, is like an SDR, when you're out there grinding and then you're being told to do X, Y, and Z by someone that's literally not been on the ground floor.
Totally. And by the
Like,
way, like the power that you have when I'm in a sales meeting or a meeting on the go to market side, and I'm like, hey, I want to do this thing. And then I sit in that meeting and they tell me like, oh, we can't do it because this or that, or this is a big risk. I know the risk. I have done the thing. And I know when it's being overblown. And I know when it's a risk. And I know the things that we need to mitigate against it. And so then that gives me the opportunity in those meetings to go like, I understand the risk. Go do it. Do these 3 things to mitigate it. But we're going to go do this thing. I'm not going to get caught up on spending the next 3 weeks talking about the risks that exist here. I understand them. I've felt them. I've done them. I can mitigate them. Go do. And like, if you don't actually know how the thing is done, you can get trapped in a universe of everybody telling you every little risk to your strategy, and then you not being able to make a decision that moves the business forward.
honestly, like that decision fatigue almost is just like insane. So I actually love that. I love core principles. I think they're great, but that is like something that people will respect and actually be like, okay, they're actually doing what they say they're doing, which is like great for individual reps. So looking over like the 19 years, when was, because this, I find this really interesting, when was the like most aggressive point of scale? Like, when were you like, oh my goodness, this is almost like the product can't even keep up? Like, you may have like your customers may be like not getting enough value, or there must have been like, there's breakages at every level, right? And then it's like, do you focus more on the customer and upselling them and like continuously around them, or the product or the net new? And it's this constant like flywheel. But like, over those 19 years, like, when was the point where you were like, I actually can't keep up with this like volume of scale?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that there's, in 2019, in February 2019, we acquired ZoomInfo. We put those 2 companies together, and then the pace of growth just like immediately accelerated.
In the market at that time.
And the market at that
That was
time, for sure.
insane.
Yes. And then we IPO'd in 2020, and and the pandemic happened. And so that put like a lot of attention on the business. And so there was like this tremendous amount of demand in the market for ZoomInfo and its solutions. And we were like in this moment where you grew by hiring more people.
Yeah.
And like, that's kind of like the greatest situation to be in. Because we had actually spent the first, up until that time, growing by like optimizing every little part of the business, optimizing the demand funnel, optimizing opportunity to close, optimizing our sales team sizes, our account management loads. And then all of a sudden we got in this place where we had this really optimized business, and the way we were going to grow the next stage of the business was going to like actually be to just add people, bring the account loads down, business grows. Add more account executives, we have enough demand for that. The account executives right now are overburdened with opportunities, and so our win rates are going down as we create more demand, so we need more people. And so it was the first kind of time in the business where your limiter was your ability to hire people. Customers wanted more solutions. We needed more engineers and product people. And then all of a sudden, like the things that I was dealing with was like leaders being like, talent acquisition is not keeping up. We need better HR processes. We need better recruiting, because we felt, and it was real in the business, that the way you were going to grow was you were going to add great headcount to the business. And so I would say like really 2019 through 2022 was like a lot of that type of scaling. And then luckily we were private equity owned. And so efficiency before we went public. So efficiency mattered, and optimization of the funnels mattered. So we met that moment with a really refined, optimized go-to-market motion and like operations that knew how to run the business in a disciplined way. That didn't happen to us early before we had that. Because I think today, a lot of companies will get like a lot of VC capital on day one, or whatever, on year two. And then they haven't actually figured out the operating model in the business. It's not
100%.
optimized. It's not disciplined. And then what they do at that stage is add heads. And then they add heads, and it's not efficient. There's no process. There's not an optimized motion. And then they're really inefficient in the way that they operate. We had a decade plus of optimizing the business before we found that moment where like scale depended on people. And so we had the foundation to support that.
It's insane, isn't it? Because I don't even know, there was a time where like people got like pre-rev investment as well, like genuinely like not expecting to make profit for X amount, and I'm sure it still happens, but just like that time where it was just like people were actually getting that. It's like, don't even have product market fit, don't have people on the ground like proving that the operations are working, and the whole go-to-market strategy is kind of just like in a playbook and not actually being executed, which to me is just like crazy, because it was just like that, like now we're just like everything that you've done is optimized, been efficient, then you went in, then you can scale aggressively, so it's just crazy. But just looking at now, like post IPO, like what are the main like differences? Like it must be just like it must be feel like just running a completely different business, in the sense that even from the talent and the HR, that must be a little bit more streamlined, etc. And now what are the main things that you're focusing on like post IPO and like when you're in this movement?
First of all, I actually think it's I don't think it's great advice that that how you run a business at $1 billion in revenue is different than how you run a business at, let's just call it 200 million in revenue. Like the principles that you built the business on at 200 million, like if you get to 200 million in revenue, and maybe there's an argument for like 150 in there too, probably between 100 and 200, let's call it. That business, it's data driven. It's operationally excellent, almost certainly, if you've gotten there. You've built a good engine for product and engineering. You have a good cadence of communication with your employees. You trust your gut. You're convicted about things. You don't make decisions by committee. Like if you're founder-led, you move quickly. When you get to $1 billion in revenue, there's all of this like common sense stuff that says like, oh, your business is different. You can't manage that way anymore. You can't understand the business like that anymore. You have to just like hire the leaders and trust them to do the thing. And like, that is not, I do not think that's how great businesses are built, like, or continue to be built. And I made those mistakes. I was like, I got too distant from the business. At $1 billion in revenue. I like had 2 presidents and like had a structure where I wasn't as close to the customer anymore. And then like people started building like committees of stuff. Everything slowed down. There's all this bureaucracy. And if I just ran it the way I ran the business when it was 200 million in revenue, that would have never happened. And we would have been fine scaling. And so I actually had to like rewind it back. And so I had to take, I took like 2 years, but over 2 years, I like rewound the business back to a place where decisions were faster. There weren't fiefdoms. We didn't hire leaders. We hired great people. We gave them room to run. But like when we were convicted about things, we did them. We didn't go to 6 weeks of committee to talk about it. We didn't have meeting after meeting after meeting about it. We just did the things. And when you start believing conventional wisdom, that's the thing that I was looking for. When you start believing conventional wisdom, it tells you can't do it like that anymore. And I think now there are a number of proof points in the market that tell you can.
Yeah, it's honestly so interesting. I think that's like the most actionable / takeaway that you can take from this podcast, because like it makes so much sense. It's just like if you get to that X amount of revenue and you're like pumping at that level, it's just like everything needed to get there has needed to be like world class to get there, and then it's just almost like stabilizing it and just like rinse and repeat.
I'll tell you the harder place to do this.
I'm interested.
Is earlier.
Yeah.
When you're at 5 million in revenue and you're the founder of your business, you're kind of doing everything. Like
that's hard.
Your hands are literally in everything, and probably nobody can do anything unless you tell them what to do. And then you have to figure out how to take yourself out of things. I read a great book early on called The E-Myth. by Michael Gerber, I think his name is. And it basically tells you, like, here's the process by which you become an expert in a part of your business, and then you hire to replace that part of the business. And then you become an expert in a part of a business and you move yourself out. That's hard because you're so used to executing being the thing that you do that makes you feel valuable to the business. Hey, when I send that marketing campaign and 50 leads come out, I feel like I gave value to the business. When I take that sales call and I close that deal, I feel like I provided value to the business. And so there's like a mental change you have to go through, and you have to change the business kind of around like that 5 million in revenue spot, where you have to like actually convince yourself that that isn't the most valuable thing you can do in the business. You have to replace yourself there, and then you have to go tackle the next hardest problem in the business. That's the harder place to do it.
Can't even imagine removing yourself from sales and what that must have been like in your brain of just like the sales isn't the number one priority right now for you to be involved in, which must just be such a weird thing when you built this in your dorm.
Yeah. I mean, actually, like the way it actually worked was like being on a sales call would not be my top priority, but building out the sales organization and the processes that we do to win and the competitive battle cards and how we create the product to be best in class so we're beating our competitors, those were the things I had to shift my focus to. And then I ended up with like a really core, great group of sellers who could do the on-call closing, and oftentimes like a lot better than me.
Yeah, I know. Honestly, it's crazy, isn't it? It's just like actually replacing yourself with someone that's better than you is just like the ultimate recruitment, like magic.
Totally.
Yeah, literally. So look, I know I've taken loads of your time, so I just want to wrap up with one question because I am actually intrigued by this. So like we have a lot of CROs on this podcast, right, that have done a really good run at a company, etc., and then transition into a CEO role in a completely new company. So like my biggest interest in like, I would just love to understand, like, if you were to move into a CEO role into a completely different company, what would be like your onboarding? Like, what would be your first 30 to 60, 90 days that you think are the top like 3 biggest priorities as a CEO moving into a new role when you've got like a revenue background?
Yeah, okay, so let me answer that question, but then let me also answer, I've had a number of my friends in this exact situation.
Yeah, it's
where they
interesting,
go
isn't
in,
it?
they become a CEO, and then they call me and they ask me for advice, and then
You're
I'll
like,
give
here we
you
go
like
again.
that advice, which I've seen a pattern of sort of miscalculating what their authority is as
Yeah, okay,
CEO of a
interesting.
new company. But I think, look, the number one thing is you have to go talk to customers.
I
Like
said it every
if
time.
you're not spending the first 30 days
I say that every
with
time.
multiple back-to-back customers and sales calls, like live action sales calls, you're just never going to have a good enough feel for the business. You have to be talking to, I mean, customers are great, so you should be talking to customers, but live action sales calls, that's where you understand the market, the objections, what your sales team is going through, where the product needs to go, where you're like under-enabled, where the product is weak, where it's strong, how you're going to lean in, what the messaging is right, like, is the narrative wrong? You're going to understand everything from a combination of customer calls and sales calls. And you have to be on both. So I would take as many of those as possible. Where you're actually in it, because I think like watching chorus or gong videos of the calls is valuable, but it doesn't land the same way as you're in the seat and you
100%.
have to answer that objection and you have to you feel pain in that call differently than I get to watch game tape. So look, I think that's number one. I view the business through 3 lenses: my customers, my employees, and then my investors. And like that's a context that I bring to every decision I make at ZoomInfo. And so like find opportunities to get as maximum interaction with those 3 constituencies. You know, I do these like roundtables with SDRs, AEs, AMs, engineers, product people, and I basically just tell them like, tell me what sucks here. Like,
So good.
I can't fix them all, but some of them I can literally send a Slack right now and fix it. And like, I need to know what those things are. There are other things that I know are problems and I'm working towards fixing them. They're not going to be fixed tomorrow, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that I can fix right now. So tell me everything. And they'll tell you. They're not shy to tell you what sucks in your business.
I bet it's a lovely day for you in the office.
Those are not my favorite days. I learn the most, but they're not my favorite days. I'm a little bit like bruised and battered coming out of those, but they're great. And like, I would never not to do them. Like, that pain is well worth the reward on the other side. So that's the advice I'd give there. The second thing is, oftentimes when my friends have gone and done this thing, they don't treat the company or the team like it's their team. They come in and they go like, oh, well, I can't do that here because blah-de-dee, blah-de-dee, blah. Or like, hey, I had one of my friends ask me like, hey, so I have this team, I have these people on the team. What do you think I should do about this person or that person? Like, how should I think about it? And it was like, they've been here for like 4 years. So I was like, are these the greatest people in the world for this position that you want to build the business with? Are they the best people in the world that you can get? Because if they're not, you got to go get those people. And like, it doesn't matter like if they were great for the last guy who was here. If you don't believe them to be really great for you, go get somebody else. Or I'll have them tell me like, oh, I can't do that in this business because the culture here is blah-de-dee, blah-de-dee, blah. It's like, the culture is whatever you want it to be now. You're the new CEO of this company. You get to decide what to do. You get to decide the culture. That is your job. You're not a victim to what was here before. You get to decide what to do going forward. And if you don't embrace that authority, what's the point of you being the CEO? And so I think there's like a timidness to taking over the organization that you should not have. And by the way, people will tell you like, oh, that'll break if you do this, or you can't be too fast. Like, I think most of those risks are just overblown. You should take a bunch of risks when you get in. You have a lot of latitude to make changes when you first get into the business. And over time, that latitude goes away. When you get there, that first like few months, like, you should be very aggressive and you should make sure that the organization is a reflection of how you would run the organization, because a year from now, you will have no excuse for it not being. You don't get to point back to the other people after a year. Like, your job was to transform the business. Did you or did you not?
I honestly think that's insane, because the culture ones, I actually hear that myself. I'm just like, but that's your job to actually create, define, and execute on that culture.
Yep. Yeah, that's your thing.
I honestly love it. The other thing was, you mentioned about the customers. I think the customers in the sales calls is just like back to back. That's exactly what I would do. The other thing that I found really useful was actually finding the last 15, 20 closed losts and understanding why they didn't pursue, why they didn't go forward, because you really understand from their perspective, like, what were the objections? Was it just a timing thing? Was it just a budget thing? Or what is it? Like, is it the product? Is it the sales reps? Is it like, and it's such a candid conversation. I found them so intrigueany.
Definitely. I think that's a super valuable call too. Yep.
Awesome, Henry. This has been amazing. Thank you so much. I've loved it. Whenever anyone asks like the dream question of having like people at your dinner table, mine's just like really successful CROs or CEOs. It's super, super sad. So this has been amazing. Yeah, just a few CEOs or CROs from public companies would be me.
Yep, makes sense. I think that's my list too.
I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And we've loved having you on.
My pleasure. And thanks for having me, Laura. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Henry.